February 20th, 1942. Over the waters north of Rabaul. The sun is already high, turning the Pacific into a hard, blinding sheet of silver. Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai eases his Mitsubishi A6M0 into a shallow climb, eyes scanning the empty sky ahead. The engine hums smoothly, familiar, trusted. Below him, the coastline of New Britain curls away under scattered cloud. Then the radio crackles. Enemy aircraft, bearing 180. Sakai tightens his grip on the stick. Moments later they appear, dark specks growing fast, resolving into unfamiliar shapes. Twin-engine bombers with clumsy silhouettes, escorted by fighters that look heavy, overbuilt. American. Sakai feels a flicker of contempt before the fight even begins. These are not British Hurricanes or experienced Chinese pilots. These are Americans, late to the war, rushed into combat, flying machines that turn poorly and bleed energy in every maneuver. He has heard the assessments repeated in briefings and ready rooms since Pearl Harbor. They do not understand air combat. The Zero rolls effortlessly onto its back and dives. The fight is short and brutal. American fighters overshoot. Bombers break formation. One escort attempts to turn with Sakai and vanishes from his gun sight in seconds, smoke trailing from its engine as it spirals toward the sea. When it's over, Sakai counts the sky. No Americans remain. Back at Vunakanau airfield, pilots laugh quietly as they climb from their aircraft, scarves darkened with sweat and oil. Mechanics bow as ground crew swarm the fighters. Someone lights a cigarette. They fly like children, one pilot says. Another nods, brave perhaps, but not trained. This belief settles quickly and deeply within the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. It feels justified. For decades, Japanese naval aviation had been built on an unforgiving principle. Only the best may fly. Candidates were culled mercilessly. Training took years. Dogfighting, gunnery, formation flying, all drilled until instinct replaced thought. A fully qualified carrier pilot was a rare thing, a craftsman as much as a warrior. Sakai knows this because he lived it. Before the war, he spent thousands of hours mastering the Zero's edge-of-stall behavior, learning exactly how far he could push before the aircraft betrayed him. He had fought in China, where enemy pilots broke quickly or died. He had crossed oceans on carriers, operating at the very limit of human endurance. Now the Americans are entering that world, and they are losing. In early 1942, Japanese pilots dominate the skies from the Philippines to the Dutch East Indies. Allied losses pile up at an alarming rate. Aircraft burn on jungle airstrips. Pilots die without ever seeing who killed them. Japanese after-action reports grow confident, even dismissive. Enemy pilots show poor formation discipline. Enemy escorts lack aggression. Enemy replacements appear inferior to those previously encountered. That last line barely raises an eyebrow. Of course, replacements are inferior. How could they not be? In Japan's system, a pilot lost in combat is almost irreplaceable. The training pipeline cannot simply accelerate. It is bound by tradition, by standards that cannot be compromised without destroying the very thing that makes Japanese aviation superior. Better to have fewer pilots, but better ones. The Americans, Japanese planners believe, have chosen the opposite path. Quantity over quality, machines over mastery. Men rushed from classrooms into cockpits, thrown into battle with little understanding of energy, angles, or patience. And at first, reality seems to confirm it. In March 1942, over Lai, a formation of American fighters arrives to escort bombers attacking Japanese shipping. The escort breaks too early. The bombers are left exposed. Zeros tear through them in minutes. A Japanese flight leader records afterward, They return again and again, but they do not improve. That sentence will not age well. Across the Pacific, in places Sakai will never see, something entirely different is happening. In Texas, California, Florida, airfields that once trained civilian pilots are expanding overnight. New runways appear. Hangars multiply. Instructors fly endless circuits, drilling young men who barely know one end of a propeller from the other. The washout rate is high. Then it drops. The syllabus changes. The goal is no longer perfection. It is throughput. American training officers begin to accept something Japanese aviation would never tolerate. Most pilots will be average. Some will be poor. A few will be exceptional. But all will be replaced. In early 1942, this difference is invisible to the men fighting over Rabaul and New Guinea. What Sakai sees is a trickle. American aircraft arriving sporadically, pilots uncertain, formations fragile. He mistakes the trickle for the source. It is only the edge of a flood. That night, Sakai writes briefly in his notebook, "Enemy pilots brave but inexperienced. Victory certain if we maintain pressure." He believes it completely. So does nearly every Japanese pilot flying that year. They have no reason not to. Yet even in those early victories, there is a detail that goes unremarked. Every time they shoot down an American aircraft, another one eventually takes its place. August 23rd, 1942. Over the Eastern Solomons. Lieutenant Masao Horikoshi adjusts his oxygen mask as the Zero vibrates around him, the Pacific stretching endlessly below. The sky ahead is crowded now, not with clouds, but with aircraft, American aircraft, too many. This is not the scattered resistance of early 1942. This is organized, layered, continuous. Horikoshi banks left as tracer fire streaks past his canopy. A wildcat flashes by, then another. He lines one up, squeezes the trigger, and watches pieces tear from its wing. The American dives away, trailing smoke. But before Horikoshi can follow, another replaces it, then another, and another. The radio is alive with voices, strained and urgent. Enemy fighters high. Another formation approaching from the east. Where are they coming from? That question hangs unanswered as the fight devolves into chaos. The Americans are not better pilots. Not yet. Horikoshi can see it in their turns, in the way they bleed speed trying to stay with the Zero. Individually, they are still inferior, but they are everywhere. When the battle finally breaks off, Horikoshi counts losses on both sides. Japanese aircraft are missing. Too many. Skilled men he knows by name have not returned. The Americans have lost more aircraft, certainly. Yet when he looks toward the horizon, he sees something unsettling. More contrails, more dots, more Americans arriving late to a fight that should already be over. Back aboard the carrier. Shokaku, the mood is different from earlier victories. There is no laughter, no cigarettes passed around with casual smiles. Mechanics work silently. Officers speak in clipped tones. Someone mutters what no one wants to say aloud. They keep coming. This is the first crack in the illusion. Until now, Japanese pilots had assumed that American losses would degrade their air power the same way Japanese losses degraded theirs. A pilot killed was a skill erased forever. A formation lost was an investment destroyed. But the Americans are not shrinking, they are expanding. In September 1942, over Guadalcanal, the pattern repeats with brutal consistency. Japanese pilots fly multiple sorties a day, exhausting themselves to maintain air superiority. They shoot down Americans, sometimes 5 or 6 in a single engagement. And the next day, the Americans return. Different aircraft, different pilots, same markings. Horikoshi shoots down a wildcat, piloted by a young man who barely reacts before the Zero's cannons tear through him. Later that afternoon, Horikoshi engages another wildcat flown with noticeably better discipline, less aggressive, more patient, refusing to turn. He does not get the kill. That night, intelligence officers brief the pilots. An enemy pilot quality appears uneven, one officer says carefully. Some inexperienced, others improving. The word sits uneasily in the room. Japanese aviation doctrine had always assumed that skill was rare, cultivated slowly, and lost forever when its bearer died. That assumption had shaped everything, from aircraft design to tactics to training philosophy. The Americans are proving something else. Skill can be manufactured, not in individuals, but in systems. Unknown to Horikoshi, the man he failed to kill that afternoon graduated from flight school less than 6 months earlier. He trained in a pipeline that accepted losses as inevitable, even expected. His instructors drilled him not to duel, but to survive, to fly in pairs, to trust numbers over instinct. He is not elite. He does not need to be. By late 1942, Japanese pilots begin to notice a subtle but deadly shift. Early American pilots had panicked under pressure. Now, many disengage calmly. They do not chase zeros into turning fights. They call for help. They retreat toward friendly formations, and help arrives. Always. Horikoshi overhears a maintenance chief speaking quietly after another long day. "We cannot keep losing pilots like this," the man says. "There are not enough to replace them." That is the truth Japanese planners have avoided confronting. The Imperial Navy's training system was never designed for attrition. It was designed for decisive victory, a short war where elite skill would overwhelm inferior numbers. But the war is not short, and numbers are no longer inferior. Every Japanese pilot lost represents years of training that cannot be replaced in time. Every American pilot lost represents weeks or months, tragic but absorbable. By November 1942, during the air battles over Henderson Field, Japanese veterans find themselves flying alongside replacements who have never seen combat. Young men who lack the instincts, the precision, the calm under fire. The irony is cruel. The Americans are improving. The Japanese are diluting. Horikoshi survives another engagement by inches, his aircraft riddled with holes. On landing, he sits in the cockpit for a long moment, hands trembling. For the first time since the war began, he feels something unfamiliar. Not fear of death, fear of exhaustion. The Americans are not winning the sky by brilliance. They are winning it by endurance. And endurance, Horikoshi realizes, is something Japan cannot train fast enough to sustain. January 14th, 1943, Pensacola, Florida. The air smells of salt and engine oil as Ensign Thomas "Tom" Weaver jogs across the tarmac, helmet tucked under one arm. He has been awake since before dawn. He will fly twice today, maybe 3 times, if the instructors decide the weather is forgiving enough. Weaver has never seen combat. He has never fired his guns in anger, but he is already part of the war. Above him, a line of training aircraft circles patiently, each one flown by a man who will soon be sent somewhere with names Weaver cannot yet pronounce. Guadalcanal, Espiritu Santo, Bougainville. The instructors do not talk about glory. They talk about procedures. You lose sight of your wingman. You break off. You don't turn with a 0. You live today so you can fight tomorrow. In Japan, such advice would sound cowardly. Here, it is doctrine. The American pilot training system has become an assembly line. Not crude, not toothless, but relentless. Cadets wash out by the thousands. Standards are firm, but not perfectionist. The goal is not brilliance. The goal is adequacy at scale. Weaver learns gunnery not to score kills, but to force an enemy to disengage. He learns formation flying until it becomes unconscious. He learns how to land on short strips, how to ditch, how to survive being shot down. Most importantly, he learns what not to do. Do not chase. Do not duel. Do not die alone. By the time Weaver graduates, he is not an ace. He is a replacement, and there are tens of thousands like him. April 7th, 1943. Rabaul. Lieutenant Masao Horikoshi watches a new group of pilots assemble on the tarmac. Their uniforms are clean. Their faces are young. Too young. He can tell who they are before anyone speaks. Replacements. They listen intently as a senior officer outlines the day's mission. Their posture is stiff, eyes alert, expressions controlled. But Horikoshi sees what the officer does not. They lack instinct. They have not yet learned the sky's cruelty. When the mission launches, Horikoshi finds himself flying cover for one of them. The young pilot breaks formation at the first sign of enemy contact, chasing a wildcat downward. Horikoshi shouts into the radio, "Stay with me!" There is no response. Minutes later, the ocean claims another aircraft. Back at base, no one speaks his name. There is no time. Japanese training has been shortened again. Flight hours cut. Gunnery practice reduced. The need for pilots outweighs the ability to train them properly. This is not incompetence. It is desperation. Japan's pilot corps had been built on exclusivity. Only the best selected, trained slowly, refined carefully. Before the war, a naval aviator was something rare. Now rarity is a liability. The Americans, by contrast, have embraced expendability, not of men, but of perfection. Their pilots arrive uneven. Some are clumsy. Some freeze in combat. Some die quickly. But some survive. And survival is the real teacher. By mid-1943, Horikoshi notices something that chills him more than numbers ever could. American pilots who survive a few missions become dangerous, not individually, but collectively. They communicate. They coordinate. They cover each other instinctively. They do not fight like duelists. They fight like units. The Zero, once supreme in the hands of masters, begins to show its age. Its lack of armor, once acceptable when flown by the elite, becomes a death sentence when mistakes are made. And mistakes are now common. Japanese pilots fly longer hours, fewer rest days, more missions. Fatigue sets in. Judgment slips. Reflexes slow. The Americans rotate pilots home. Not all, but enough. Horikoshi hears rumors. Pilots sent back to the States to train others. Men with only modest combat records, but recent experience. Their knowledge multiplies. Japan cannot afford that luxury. Every experienced pilot is needed at the front. Everyone lost is irreplaceable. June 19th, 1943, over the Solomon Sea. Horikoshi engages a wildcat flown with steady, cautious precision. The American refuses to turn, keeps speed, calls for support. 2 more wildcats appear within seconds. Horikoshi disengages. This would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Back at base, Horikoshi listens as an intelligence officer reads intercepted American communications. New squadrons arriving, new aircraft types, replacement pilots rotated in regularly. A quiet realization spreads among the veterans. The Americans are not trying to win by brilliance. They are trying to outlast. Japan's system assumes war is decided before fatigue matters. America's assumes fatigue is inevitable and plans around it. That difference is beginning to decide everything. Horikoshi writes in his personal notebook that night, "The enemy is not skilled because they are superior men. They are skilled because they have time. Time to train, time to rest, time to replace losses. Japan is running out of all 3. June 19th, 1944, over the Philippine Sea. The sky is crowded in a way Commander Masao Horikoshi has never seen before. Not with enemy aircraft alone, but with inexperience. To his left and right, fly pilots who should not yet be here. Men with barely 100 hours in type. Men whose hands are steady on the stick, but whose eyes do not yet read the sky correctly. Men who have memorized tactics without understanding why they exist. Below them, the American fleet stretches to the horizon. Above them, Hellcats. Dozens. The engagement unfolds quickly and disastrously. American fighters do not rush in. They climb. They wait. They strike in coordinated passes, diving with speed and pulling away before Japanese pilots can respond. Radios crackle constantly. Calls for help, warnings, vectors. The Americans talk continuously. Japanese radios are mostly silent. When combat finally dissolves, Horikoshi counts losses that feel unreal. Squadrons that existed at dawn are gone by midday. Pilots who took off beside him do not return. Later, American pilots will call this battle the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Horikoshi will never hear that phrase, but he will understand the meaning. This is the moment when Japan's elite aviation culture finally collapses under its own weight. For years, Japanese naval planners had believed that superior training and spirit would overcome material disadvantage. And for a time, they were right. At Pearl Harbor, at Coral Sea, even at Midway's opening moments. But brilliance cannot be amortized. Once the veteran corps is gone, there is nothing left to train the next generation fast enough. Japan's training pipeline, never designed for attrition, breaks completely. July 1944, at Tsugi Air Base, Japan. Flight cadet Kenji Nakamura climbs into a zero with barely 60 hours of flight time. He has never fired his guns in the air. He has never flown against a maneuvering opponent. He has been taught what to do, but not when. There was no time. Fuel shortages have cut training hours further. Instructors are exhausted or dead. Aircraft are worn. Spare parts scarce. Nakamura knows the basics. He does not know the sky. In America, by contrast, the training machine has reached maturity. Pilots graduate by the thousands. Replacement squadrons arrive with predictable regularity. Losses are expected, calculated, absorbed. When a squadron bleeds too heavily, it is rotated out and rebuilt. Japan cannot do this. Every pilot sent to combat is assumed expendable, because there is no mechanism to preserve experience. The Americans treat experience like a renewable resource. Japan treats it like a consumable. That difference is fatal. October 24th, 1944. Leyte Gulf. Horikoshi flies cover for a strike he knows will fail. American fighters dominate the airspace completely now. Radar, radios, and numbers combine into something Japan can no longer counter. When the mission ends, only half the aircraft return. The survivors land in silence. No one pretends this is temporary anymore. A junior officer finally says what everyone knows. We are flying boys now, not men, not pilots. Boys with wings and orders they cannot fulfill. Meanwhile, American squadrons continue to cycle through combat and rest. Pilots with 20 missions become instructors. Instructors return to combat refreshed. Lessons learned over the Philippines appear weeks later in tactics over Okinawa. The American system learns. The Japanese system bleeds. By late 1944, Japanese planners make a decision that would have been unthinkable at the war's start. They will stop trying to replace pilots properly. They will use them once. The kamikaze program is born not from fanaticism, but from arithmetic. If pilots cannot survive long enough to gain experience, if replacements arrive slower than losses, then survival itself becomes inefficient. Horikoshi understands this immediately and rejects it quietly. He continues flying conventional missions until fuel shortages ground him permanently. His last entry reads, "We once laughed at the enemy's replacements. Now they are the enemy." The Americans never needed every pilot to be exceptional. They needed enough pilots to survive long enough to become dangerous. Japan needed every pilot to be exceptional, And once that became impossible, the war in the air was already ready. Lost. March 1945. Over Okinawa. The sky is full again. But this time, Commander Masao Horikoshi is not in it. He stands on the edge of a battered airstrip, watching aircraft take off that he knows will not return. Young pilots climb into cockpits with faces set in practiced calm, scarves tucked neatly, letters folded inside flight jackets. Ground crew bow as they pass. No one speaks too much. These are not replacement pilots in the old sense. They are final ones. The kamikaze program has transformed Japan's air war into something unrecognizable from the force that once terrorized the Pacific. There is no longer any pretense of rotation, survival, or accumulated skill. Each sortie consumes not just an aircraft, but the entirety of a pilot's future. Horikoshi knows why this happened. It was not because Japanese pilots lacked courage. It was because the system could no longer afford experience. Every experienced pilot lost earlier in the war had created a vacuum that could not be filled. Training programs shrank instead of expanded. Fuel shortages cut flight hours. Aircraft were diverted straight to combat units without adequate testing. By contrast, across the Pacific, American carriers operate like factories afloat. Pilots arrive with standardized training. They fly similar aircraft. They use common tactics. They speak constantly on the radio, sharing threats, mistakes, corrections in real time. When a pilot is shot down, another takes his place, and another, and another. Not identical, not perfect, but present. That presence becomes overwhelming. April 1945, USS Essex, Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Mark Sullivan, U.S. Navy, watches as a new pilot is briefed before his first combat sortie. The young man looks nervous. His hands shake slightly as he adjusts his gloves. Sullivan remembers being that man. He leans over and says quietly, "Stick with your wingman. Don't chase. Trust the radio." The advice is simple. It works. Because Sullivan will still be alive tomorrow to give it again. This is the final, invisible advantage of the American system. Survivors teach. Japan's survivors disappear. By Okinawa, American pilots routinely fly dozens of missions. Some reach 50, some more. They rotate home, write manuals, train others. The collective knowledge of the force grows thicker with every month. Japanese aviation knowledge dies with each pilot lost. The imbalance is no longer subtle. It is mathematical. August 1945, Japan. The airfields are quiet. Horikoshi listens to the radio as the emperor speaks. The words are formal, distant, heavy with meaning. When it is over, no one moves for a long time. The war is finished, not with a final dogfight, not with a last ace rising to meet the enemy, but with absence, silence where pilots once stood. Years later, American analysts will calculate the numbers. Over 200,000 American pilots trained during the war. Japan trained a fraction of that, and lost the core of its elite in the first 18 months. The Americans never needed their replacements to be better. They needed them to exist, to arrive on time, to keep coming. That was enough. Horikoshi will live to old age. In his memoirs, he writes a sentence that captures the entire air war of the Pacific more clearly than any statistics. We believed skill would defeat quantity. We did not understand that quantity, properly trained, becomes skill. The Americans did not win the air war because their pilots were fearless. They won because fear did not end their system. Japanese pilots once dismissed American replacements as inferior. Then they noticed something terrifying. Every time one fell, another appeared, and another, until the sky itself belonged to the side that could keep flying tomorrow.